and welcome to the Healing Half. In fact, welcome to the Healing Half special edition, where we are going to take a full hour to dive into Mr. Scott's wonderful story, where he's going to share about his life with a physical disability and how he has been able to find purpose in it. When Scott and I were talking about what we wanted to cover before the show, I was like, there is no way we're going to get all of that done in a half an hour. So make sure you save this episode and come back to it if you're not able to stay for the full time, because there is going to be so much wisdom packed on in. But before we jump to the wonderful Scott and his amazing inspiration, I want to make sure you guys know who I am and what this show is. So, when I was 13, my mom passed away from cancer, and I spent the better part of a decade pretending I was fine, pushing people away who wanted to talk about my mom. Anybody who really wanted to help me heal and grieve, I wasn't having any of it because I bought into the dangerous lie that if I needed help, that if I was emotional and if I was sad and crying and all those things that grief has, that there was something wrong with me. And I really tried to stay strong. And of course, you can't run from grief for forever. So eventually, all that came crashing down. And I finally got to the counselor, started to finally unpack a lot of that baggage, a lot of that emotional trauma. And I quickly realized life is so much sweeter when we surrender to the healing that needs to take place. So, I wanted to start a show that encouraged us to learn how to heal our own wounds as well as learn about how to help other people with theirs. And that's kind of what tonight's show is all about. Is statistically, you might not have a physical disability. If you do, awesome, great. We're happy you're here. But this is going to be great for us to get some insight on what Scott's life has been like and how we can help others. So, without further ado, Scott, welcome and thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Hey, Mickey. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, Scott, it is such an honor to have you here. Now, you have a story that is very unique, and I would love for us just to dive right on into that. So, do you mind just kind of introducing yourself and a little bit about your story?
Yeah, as you said, my name is Scott Johnston, and live in Central California. Born and raised in Fresno, and I was born 3 months premature at a pound and a half. Um, and basically, when I was born, I was perfectly fine for a week, and then had a massive stroke basically at a week old, and the doctors still really don't know what caused it, but the bleed on the brain caused a disability called cerebral palsy, and the brain bleed was the most severe bleed you could have. And when I was born, the doctors basically told my parents that if I survived, I'd be a vegetable. I wasn't supposed to be able to
Hmm.
walk, talk, see, feed myself, pretty much do anything. And typically, kids that have my brain bleed, what that's the situation that they're in. Obviously, for me, God had other plans because, I'm here talking to you,
Yeah.
and here uh, able to motivate other people and inspire them and let them know that no matter what they're facing, you don't always have to listen to uh, what other people tell you is possible for you. That life has a way of working itself out, and there's some surprises along the way. So
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I'm already crying. I cry a lot on the show. So I'm already tearing up because I am just so grateful that you're here and that you're sharing your beautiful story with us. So thank you again. I think the next thing that I kind of want to ask you about, and I'm just using my own experience going through, and I'm thinking about when I was in elementary school, we had, kids in our class that were in wheelchairs of various sorts, and they had disabilities of different ranges. And of course, as a kid, I'm sure I made a ton of mistakes about like staring or pointing or asking stupid questions. So being that we know what it's like on the other side, can you maybe share your experience of what it was like for you being a child with a physical disability?
yeah, and I think my answer is going to surprise you a little bit, um, because my uh, experience growing up and main um, issue with feeling different didn't necessarily come from the kids. It came more from adults
Mm.
and teachers. Now, I was born in 1987, and for those of you who know history, if you're aware, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, which mandated access and uh, even opportunities for people with disabilities in the job market, school, and even before that, 504 was passed in 1975, which mandated actually specifically equal access to education and created special ed. And so I say all that to say I started school in 1991, a year after the ADA was passed. So it's not lost on me that had the people that fought for the ADA to be passed literally a year before I started school, I might not have even been able to get an education. And so, uh, you know, when it was time for me to go to school, the school district kind of looked at me and saw that I had a wheelchair, and but yet I was cognitively pretty typical, and they're like, "Oh, we don't know really what to do with you." So then went to junior high for 2 years, high school for four, and then finally, when I got to college, my mom decided to just leave me at Fresno State for
Okay.
5 years. Typically, I would have gone to community college, but she's like, "What's the point of getting him all set up and then just having to move him again in another 2 years?" So I had a I
Wow.
had a really, for the first time in my life, actually, when I got to college, I had a really, really great home for
Hmm.
5 years. And I was one of the rare kids that had an idea and knew what I wanted to do. So I had my major declared from the minute I stepped on campus and never changed it. Um, and so I was taking major classes as a freshman. And
Hmm.
so, kind of through all 5 years, I met my professors and knew them, and it was a really, really good, stable home. But uh, you know, it was tough, uh, and fairly nomadic, um, and just growing up, going kind of back to your original point with people staring and just kind of the way they would respond to me. I A couple of instances. Uh, I remember one time I was taking uh, a summer school science class. I studied really, really hard for a science test. Stayed up all night studying, and I got an A. And the teacher actually asked me in front of the entire class if I cheated on the test,
Oh, no.
and I was like, "No, first grade." Like academic integrity means everything to me. Really didn't hit me until afterward, and the kids actually stood up to the teacher and were like, "That's not how you treat Scott. Like, we know this kid. Like, we know how hard he works. Like, that's not right." And so I've always been really well respected by my peers, and they've kind of understood. And you talk about in your school district, you had kids with disabilities um, that were around, and in chairs. I didn't at any of my schools, from except for the 2 years or three that I went to a school for kids with disabilities. Once I got into the other school district, I was the only one in a wheelchair at any of my schools.
Wow.
until
Wow.
until my junior year of high school.
Okay.
I was it.
That's a long time.
Yeah. And I mean, even throughout life, I'd go and go to different events, and I'd be the only one in a chair, and people would be like, "Well, what? You're in a chair? Like we've never had anybody with a disability before." I'm like, "Well, you got one now. You'll figure it out." And to kind of piggyback off of that, another experience that I remember is I was in choir in junior high, and I auditioned to be a part of a honor choir that was going to be performing in Hawaii. And I sent in an audition tape and got accepted. And we got all the paperwork to set up for travel and all the liability stuff, and of course they want your medical history, right? So my mom sits down and starts writing, you know spastic quad CP, has a history of seizures, like has had this surgery, this surgery, this surgery, you know bleed on the brain, and like all that stuff. And so one day I'm in her classroom after school. I'll never forget this. And she picks up the phone, and it was the director of the conference. And she's like, "Yeah, Mrs. Johnston, we got your son's like medical history, and he's in a wheelchair." "Yes." "And he sings?" "Yes." "Well, we've never had anybody in a wheelchair that sings." "Well, you got one now. You'll figure it out. Like we'll see you in Hawaii, and we'll figure it out." And like that's basically been my entire life. And one thing that I forgot to mention, oh well, and I can maybe mention this later, but CP is a very wide spectrum disability. So
Mm.
you can even get two people with quote unquote the same disability, but their experiences are completely different because
Mm.
it affects everybody differently. And I actually have the most rare form, which is spastic quad. It affects all four of my limbs, and as well as fine motor. Like I said, people can have trouble with speech, trunk control. They can have a weak trunk, all sorts of stuff. So it's a tough one in that there's not a lot of people to relate to at times. So
Right.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, and on that note, as in regards to school, and I'm so glad college was a good experience for you. That's amazing. You said you were the only one in a chair. Did you have a hard time making friends?
Um, no, I didn't, because I have a very outgoing personality. Um, Now I will say, seemingly I didn't have trouble making friends, but because of my own internalized, and I'll use a word you or many other people have probably never heard of, ableism. Um, and I had a lot of internalized ableism because of the way I was treated. And ableism is the term that we in the disability community use to describe the discrimination that we've faced based on our disability.
Mm.
So some people, like, if they first hear that and don't know what it means, they'll think, "Yeah, I'm an ableist." Nah, it's not a good thing. Like it's basically akin to racism, you know.
Oh no.
So uh, and because of the way I was treated, I had a lot of that internalized in me, and it's a human thing. We all do, and it's okay to a point. Uh, but especially as I was growing up, I could see, looking back, where I kind of held people at a distance somewhat
Mm.
and didn't really let them in, especially when it came to um, getting older and dating and all that stuff, I never did that because I just assumed like nobody would ever see me that way or like want to choose me
Mm,
because my life has been so hard and it is so hard.
mm.
I'm like, if anybody ever does, like, they're just gonna check out, you know?
Yeah.
And um and the stats sadly bear that out, 90% of the marriages in which there's somebody with a disability in the family, doesn't even have to be a spouse, it could be a relative, a child, whatever. 90% of those marriages end in divorce.
Oh my goodness gracious. I never would have guessed that.
So
Mm,
I've got that swimming around in my head. And so anytime there was ever a chance for more than a friendship, I would get clingy, needy, basically, please don't leave me, and self sabotage and say, I think basically I'm going to end this before it gets started. And
mm.
it may hurt now and suck now, but it's at least better than them leaving later.
Oh, well, thank you for being vulnerable and for sharing all of that. I love that you kind of taught us that word, and I'm sorry that you have to deal with that. Like you said, like it's crappy that that's like you deal with ableism and those limiting beliefs that have kind of come from that. So thank you for sharing, and I think that's a good thing for all of us to be aware of. And speaking of things to be aware of, as I look at my notes here, could you kind of transition to how life changed for you and things we should kind of be aware of from college and before to kind of after college into adulthood?
Yeah. So I mentioned that in college I had my major picked out and knew what I wanted to do. My degree is in broadcast journalism. I wanted to be a sportscaster. Like, that was my whole plan because I wanted to use the platform of a job in sports media to then in the off season speak and share my story. And
Mm,
I felt a call in college to really uh God told me to join the ministry. And I'm like, join the ministry? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't feel like I'm a pastor. Like, I'm not Catholic, so I'm not going to become a priest. Like, I want to be a husband and a father, so I don't think a vow of celibacy is in the cards. Like,
tough to do.
yeah. So, um, like, what are you talking about, God? And I finally figured out, like, I think he was talking about, like, I need you to tackle all of this internalized, you know, all of these internalized issues. I need you to start tackling them because I want you to join the ministry of your life and your life's experience. I want you
Mm,
to minister through that. And so after I kind of figured that out, that kind of gave me a why that was bigger than a cool job in sports. Yeah, it'd be awesome to get paid to go to the Super Bowl and the World Series for a living. Like, who wouldn't want to do that? But my why was always bigger than that.
mm,
And so uh, graduated and just fully expected to be able to get a job and uh, basically found the rude awakening of there's a lot of limitations in uh, the job market because of my disability, mainly
mm,
because a lot of or a big issue that I face is um, not being able to use a public restroom on my own. And
mm,
as a child, in going all the way through school, even in college, I was able to get help.
mm,
Now, I'm looking for a job for 8 months or so. Finally, get a job at a place that sells wheelchair accessible vans. And first time in my life that I'm, um, you know, trying to navigate the restroom on my own, and it was awful.
mm,
And I'm like, this just isn't working. So I left the job after a month and tried and tried and tried for about 5 or 6 years, everything I could do to get my foot in the door in sports media, and it wasn't working.
Mm.
And even before that, um, I had gone through depression in college. Growing up, I had some issues with um, my dad, and it's pretty common for people with CP in my experience to or any disability to have issues with the same sex parent.
Mm.
So because if you think about it, that parent is putting a lot of their hopes and dreams into their child,
Mm.
right? Whereas the opposite sex parent is able to kind of look at things more from a compassionate, logical standpoint and say, like, okay, that's great, but there are other things at play here. You know what I mean? And
Yeah. Wow.
um, at least that's my interpretation of it. But anyway, so it led to a lot of grief and I going through depression in college and working through things with my dad. That was the first time I started struggling with suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideations. Um, and went through counseling, thought it was good. And about a month after I uh, finished counseling for the semester, they came back. But
I'm so sorry.
I never, well, I shouldn't say never, but it took me a long time to actually decide to get help. I just pushed them away and basically lived with them every day for 8 years.
Oh my gosh.
Um, because my dad had a history of depression and I knew what he went through and I didn't want to go back through depression and I was scared of going through what he went through and I'm like I don't want to go through that so I just chose not to deal with it and um, fortunately, I knew that I was here for a purpose, and it didn't include checking out early because
Mm.
that's one of the blessings of having my disability and knowing my story of what I went through is I know that God exists because I exist. And like he didn't create me and I'm not here simply to give up and check out early. Like
Oh, you're
that's
so sweet.
and my mom's put in way too much time and money, literally money invested in me between surgery, therapy, wheelchairs, like all of this stuff. I literally say I'm probably the $5 million man and counting. The only thing that sucks is I can't cash in on that equity. Um,
Oh, yeah.
like what am I gonna do? Pawn myself? Like
No, no, we're not gonna do that. No, no, no.
like I'm just hanging in a pawn shop. Like somebody please come get me. Um, um, but but anyway, like dealing with those thoughts, it all came to a head when I was kind of going through and navigating adulthood when I couldn't uh, get the job in sports media or marketing that I
Hmm.
thought I was going to have, um, and uh, I went through counseling again and was seeing a therapist and realized that I had to go through a process of grieving the life that I thought I was going to have.
Mm. Tell me more about that. You know I'm a sucker for grief stories.
Yeah. So basically, like I said, for 5 or 6 years there, I was just bound and determined, like I'm gonna make it, like I'm gonna figure this out. And like I tried being a writer, I tried podcasting, I tried uh, video editing, I tried just about I tried voiceover, like I tried just about everything you could think of within the realm of, media broadcasting to kind of try and put some stability together, and it wasn't coming. And
Mm.
and it got to the point where I was just so just angry, depressed, like, but yet still on the outside was able to compartmentalize it and be somewhat the positive, joyful, like motivational guy that everybody knows and loves. But on the inside, I was dying.
Mm.
And what really started kind of turning things around for me was actually when I reconnected with um, an old friend from high school, and we started talking, and she ended up expressing interest in me romantically, and I'm like, okay, like, I'm like, I definitely want this, but like, wasn't expecting it. And then I ended up doing what I'd always done, which was be my, caring, sweet, loving self, positive self that really attracted her up until the point that she started returning things. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, this isn't going to work. Like, you don't have a job. Like, you can't drive. Like you can't take care of a family, and this girl could be it. Like, so
Mm.
that insecurity really cropped up in me, and I started kind of pushing her away without
Oh.
even knowing, and getting really frustrated when she started pulling away because I didn't know why it was happening. I just knew that it had always happened, and I assumed it was because of my disability. And that's and knowing who she was, uh, I realized she's not like that. Like, there's got to be some other thing that's going on here. And I started around that time really digging into my Bible every day, which is something up until that point I hadn't. Um, and that's when God really got a hold of my heart to say, look, like, I know what you want and what you need, but you've got to fall in love with me first and do some
Mm.
work with me first. And then I'll take you where you need to go. But it's out there for you. You've just got to put in the work.
Mm.
And so with going through that experience, um, I am now able to, kind of help others navigate all the struggles that I had. And one thing I didn't mention is, um, as somebody with a disability in childhood, up until 21, services for therapy and evaluations for equipment are provided. But the day you turn 21, that's all cut off.
Really?
Yeah. So it's very much like being a
Mm.
foster kid. So happy
Mm.
birthday, you're on your own. Like,
Oh my
and and
gosh.
so and so not only during that time was I dealing with trying to get a job and putting that together, I was also trying to figure out doctors, and also trying to push through a power share that took 4 years, four different doctors in four different companies just to get done. And then, oh, by the way, I was also trying to figure out uh, starting a business. And then finally, I got a van that I could drive after 7 years that had major issues too at the same time. And then on top of that, it's like, oh, by the way, let's figure out dating too. And it's like something had to go. And unfortunately, she was what had to go at the time.
Mm.
And, I just, I needed that kind of kick in the pants to be like, okay, this is what you've always gotten, like, because of the way you've been
Mm.
acting after reading some books and really starting to delve into doing some work for really the first time that uh, in my life, because I actually had time to do that work.
Mm.
Because school was such a struggle, uh, I had to give myself some grace and realize I just didn't have time. I just didn't have
Right.
time to do that work. And on top of that, excuse me, nobody could speak to it. Like I couldn't talk to my family about it. Like nobody really understood what I was going through. I didn't even understand it. And it wasn't
Mm.
until like I was going through this time of struggle and not feeling enough for a relationship, I reached out to a dating coach that I found on Instagram, and because I was thinking, okay, maybe I just need to learn about dating and like how that all works. Um, and so I started working with her, and really quickly, one time during one of our sessions, she was like, you know, like I can give you all the dating stuff all day, but until you figure out why you're not enough,
Mm.
like I can't help you. And
Mm.
so I um ended up looking at for the first time actually CP support groups on
Okay.
Facebook. Like I didn't before that, like and I'm a 90s kid, so we didn't grow up with social media, and so it hadn't even occurred to me to even look for those.
Mm.
And like I was grasping at straws. I couldn't figure out why like I was feeling like I needed to prove myself and like why I wasn't enough. And
Mm.
um, I put it out there and people were like, well, are you a miss eater? Like, do you use diapers? Like, I'm like, no, like if only it were that simple. Like I like and I'm literally pulling my hair out. And then finally somebody in one of those groups said one of those days or one day, um, do you ever feel like you're not enough for a relationship because of the way like people have treated you in your entire life?
Mm.
Oh, that's it. Like that. Like I can fix that. I know I can fix that because I've been through therapy before. Like if I can
Mm.
fix what I fixed with my dad, I can fix this. And so uh, I ended up working with a life coach um, for a while, and around the same time, ended up connecting with a young man with CP who has a very similar story to my own, and ended up mentoring him uh,
Mm.
for for a few years, and I still am. And there was a situation with him where a young lady was interested in him, and he ended or she ended up actually reaching out to me because we were in a group kind of all together, and she poured her heart out to me as like, I'm interested in this guy, but he's pushing me away. Like, can you tell me like what's going on? I'm like, I can tell you exactly what's going on because I live in his head. Like I live
Mm.
there. And so that's what really uh spurred me on to become a coach and be like,
Mm.
give people that don't necessarily fit in the box of somebody with a severe disability but aren't
Right.
completely able-bodied either some resources to work on this stuff from somebody who gets it,
Mm.
you know
That's
and
awesome, Scott. That's
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah. And so that's pretty much why I became a life coach. And uh, it hasn't been easy. Like I said, I had to really do a lot of the work of finding those resources on my own and putting the pieces
Mm.
together on my own because I kept reaching out to people, telling them my story, and uh, basically those were massive cries for help. because the
Mm.
one thing you learn as a person with a disability is you need to be your own best advocate. Like if you're not talking and telling people what you need, the world's just going to pass you by. And so
Mm.
my thinking subconsciously was, if I keep talking about what I'm going through, somebody's going to know somebody that's going to be able to help me. Guess what? Nobody did.
Oh.
And still, I mean, as far as work and I'm very much on my own.
Mm.
Like I'm still trying to have to put stuff together. And there's just parts of my life that I'm kind of beyond help, you know, um, because even the quote unquote help that is out there that exists, I'm not necessarily a fit for.
Mm.
And um, so it's a definitely a different existence, but I want to remind people and leave people with the thought of um, even people with disabilities are uh, humans going through human experiences. They're just
Mm.
different.
Right.
It's just a different experience, but it is very much a human experience. And
Wow.
76% of people with disabilities are under to unemployed, and um, that's a stat that hasn't moved since the ADA was passed in 1990. Hasn't moved in 30 years. Um, and so there's a long way to go. But luckily, there are people out there that I've met on social media that are in similar spots that are making things happen. And it's our generation that are standing up, sharing our stories, and saying like this is not okay, and we need to
Mm.
fix things. So I'm very hopeful that the next generation is going to be able to benefit from that, and things are going to be different. But that being said, the disability community is the world's largest minority,
Mm.
and it's a minority that anybody can join at any time. Um, but yet it's the invisible minority. Nobody wants to talk about it.
Mm.
And so I would really tell any parents or teachers out there that when you're dealing with young people who have questions, who see somebody with a disability, and they maybe are staring and are asking those questions, that it's okay. Let
Mm.
them ask questions. In my experience and the people that I've talked to and heard speak, no matter what the disability, we'd rather have you ask questions and get the right answers than stay silent, say nothing, and have
Mm.
ignorance grow.
Okay. So to play that out really quick, like if I'm walking with a little kid and they kind of point at you and they say, "Why is he in a wheelchair?" Can you walk me through either what I should say or wait, do I walk the kid up to you? What if you're in dinner?
Say,
I don't want to
no,
interrupt.
well, yeah, you okay? If I'm in dinner, say, maybe not now, but in a little bit, you can go ask them. Like, or like if I'm just going by, I'll actually and I hear that, I will actually make a point to go over and say, I hear somebody has some questions here. Like, what can I
Mm,
answer for you?
yeah.
Now, if you're an adult, it's a different story. I, you should not be that should not be the first thing you ask. If you're a little kid, it's different. It's okay. They don't know any better. But
Right.
maybe ask me my name first before you
Okay.
ask any invasive medical questions, and like
Sure.
maybe like what do you like to do for a hobby, because I'm a person, and honestly, yeah, my disability may be the most at first blush the most obvious thing about me, but it's probably the least interesting. Like,
Mm,
I have a lot more that I have to offer than just my disability, um,
wow.
and
Yeah.
just my story, and also for anybody who's listening with a disability, you're entitled to have boundaries. Like, you
Mm,
are entitled to say, like, I don't feel like talking about my story today. Like, that's okay.
yeah.
And people aren't entitled to uh your medical history when you don't even know them, so
Oh, right, right. Well, that is those are really good, nuggets of wisdom. I guess kinda like my to take in that same vein, like, kinda same, what in addition to treating you, like a person and, like, asking you about your personhood first and not just go straight to the disability, and also I think that's good for us to remember, like, in the same way, I had a guest come on who talked about suicide. The first question everybody asks about her son who died from suicide, was, "Well, how did he do it?" And it's like, whoa, like not
oh,
appropriate. Like
that's
they
such a
probably
gross question.
such a gross question, right? And so it's kind of like you kind of have to check yourself. Like, yes, everyone's curious, but that curiosity can be put in a boundary, and like you don't have to
Yeah.
know that answer.
Well, or the most popular thing that uh, I guess I got this more in school, but at times I'll still get it, and I've heard other people talk about this too. And we're both adults here, and I assume most of your audience are adults, so I'll go there. The Along those lines, a question that I know people probably think when they first see me, and that I've been asked on occasion is, "Can you have sex?"
Mm.
Like, why is that the first thing you think of? Like,
Right. I'm sorry that you've been asked that before. That is
yeah,
extremely invasive and none of their darn business.
but yet they're curious, and there's people out there that are opening that up and talking about that, and so uh, it's uh, it's good to talk about it because, again, the more we don't talk about it, the more ignorance grows, right?
And then am I correct though that it's you should ask that of somebody you have a relationship with, like a
Yes,
friendship with, or go to
yes,
someone who's like got an Instagram page dedicated to that and like that's what
yeah,
they've opened up?
yeah. Either, but I
Either.
mean, but
Okay.
if you're actually gonna have an open dialogue with somebody, just in the world, that's not online in a place dedicated for that, because, like you said, there are spaces for that. Um, like, I would just say, have it be somebody you know,
Yeah.
and
Be a friend.
well. Be a friend, like just
Right.
just be like, I'm just curious. Like, if you don't mind, um, I have some questions. I'm like, sure, fine. Like,
Mhm.
and if it's a good friend or somebody I've known for years, I have no problem. Like, because I'd
Right.
rather them learn from me
Yeah.
than, again, make assumptions, right?
So true, so true.
And
That is such good wisdom.
and
Thank you.
and not everybody can and or wants to, based on their level of injury, or their specific circumstances. um, I don't have a spinal cord injury, so that's on the table for me.
Mhm.
um, but anyway, just don't make that the first question you ask.
Right, right out of the gate. We don't have to talk about that. Well, and I get as we kind of wrap up our time together, and I'm so grateful for you and for your wisdom and just all of this stuff. You kind of mentioned in childhood, it was kind of the adults that made you almost feel ostracized a little bit more, and then into adulthood, you mentioned a couple of things. It was expensive for you and your mom. There's a lot of lack of support after 21 years old. So I guess I'm thinking like for us as community members, what can we do? Like, what can we do to help support parents, anything that we can do to help support adults with disabilities. I don't want to leave this without kind of having some like tangible ways to like actually help people who have been kind of like you said cut off from a lot of their help streams.
Yeah, I would say the first and most obvious thing would be to educate yourself.
Mm,
You know, use Google, use the internet. We live in the information age. Use social media, follow accounts from uh, people in the disability community and disabled creators. And that's another thing. When it comes to language is very subjective within the disability
mm,
community. Some people like to use what is called uh, person first language, where I'm a person with a disability. Other people like to use disability first language, where they call themselves disabled. They identify as disabled. Some people use special needs. I personally can't stand the term special needs. Like,
mm.
and for myself, I will use person first language and
Okay.
disability first language interchangeably. Like it doesn't matter to me. Um,
And
and
person first, sorry, would just be Scott is a person with
yeah,
disabilities.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Or yeah,
yeah,
correct me. I don't wanna if I
yes.
said it wrong,
Versus
like, let me
no,
know.
no. Versus I'm a person with a disability, or or versus Scott is disabled. You know, or or
Okay,
or he's a uh yeah, just, or like I would say, yeah, I have a disability, or uh I'm disabled. Like that would be kind of disability first language.
okay,
Whereas if you're saying somebody is a person with a disability, that's person first language.
okay.
And there's nothing wrong with the word disabled. And
Hmm.
also, a lot of this is subjective because it's generational, right? And so uh, the word handicap is kind of a no-no in the disabled
Yeah.
community now. Like we stay away from that. But honestly, like, realize, like, if my mom uses the word handicap, like, I know there's no harm in that because it's generational. That's just what she
Mm.
knows, you know? And like, I've heard people that, were of age in the 70s that use the word crippled, like, to refer
Really?
to themselves. Just and to me, I would never use that. And there are people that are my age. There's it's called the crippled pride movement, where they're trying to take that term back and use it in a
Mm.
positive way. I don't agree with it myself.
Okay.
Um, I don't use that term myself, um, but it's very subjective and it is generational. So,
Mm.
like, kind of give people that space, and obviously, talking about language, like, I'm reminded of this cartoon that I saw, as uh, I think a child or a teenager, that said, has a guy in a wheelchair at in heaven, and I think Saint Peter is at the gate, or there's an angel with him, and the angel asks him, like, okay, so how do you want to be uh, referred to, like, disabled or a person with a disability, wheelchair user, whatever. And he's like, how about Tom? Like, Tom works.
Mm.
Like, I have a name, like, try that first.
Yeah.
That always works versus getting so bogged down into what the person's situation is. So,
Mm.
and just, we're people. Get to know us first, and go from there. Um,
Yeah.
and for anybody with a disability, I know how hard it is. but also remember and realize that not everybody's ignorant and not everybody's judging you based on your disability. And we in the disability community, we need to give people who are outside of the disability community the benefit of the doubt as well and give them a chance to get to know us instead of
Hmm.
pushing them away at first blush too.
No, we talked about so much today. Is there any last thing that you would like us to know?
Yeah, one other thing would be we talked about advocacy, and I mentioned to educate yourself, but along with educating yourself, please, 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 if you find good content that's talking about disability, and people's experiences or just generalized information around disability that people with disabilities are sharing or organizations that support people with disabilities are sharing, please share that and engage with
Hmm.
that content because whether you have a disability or not, because we need advocates, more advocates. The more advocates we can get, the better. And we've seen that with uh, you know other minorities in recent past where everybody's engaging in conversation, and we don't see that as much in the disability community. So please make sure to share that information that you're learning with other people and start engaging in those conversations because
Hmm.
the more conversations happen, the less ignorance happens, and the better the world's going to be for those conversations.
Hmm.
So,
That is so wonderful, and as we kinda come up on our hour here, which is so great, thank you for all this wisdom. This is unbelievable. I know you mentioned coaching, so can you tell me just one more time for everybody listening, who should they send your way, and how can they get in touch with you?
all right. So, I am a coach that works with really anybody and everybody on self worth, confidence, specifically a few of the areas that I like to work with is young men that are lacking some confidence when it
Mm.
comes to dating and putting themselves out there. And really, I don't call myself a dating coach because I don't have a whole lot of experience dating myself. But uh, what I say is I coach people uh, and help them gain the confidence to start dating. You know what I
That's
mean?
awesome.
To start
Yeah.
putting themselves out there. So that and obviously, anybody with a disability who feels limited by their circumstances. Um, I'm I'm a real big believer in yes, we all have limitations, but how can we learn to play within our limitations to where our limitations no longer limit us, if
Mm.
that makes sense. Um,
Absolutely.
so uh, an example of that is online. One of the biggest things that limits me is transportation issues. So, I have trouble meeting people. That's been the awesome thing about the pandemic is it's opened more opportunities to go online and have awesome discussions and meet people virtually instead of, in person where I don't have to travel. And so there's been really blessings in disguise, even in seemingly horrible circumstances. And that's kind of what I'm all about and what I'm all about kind of helping people discover. So, uh,
Oh.
yeah,
Well, we are so grateful for you for spending your time with us today. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being here, Scott. I just know God is using you for big and beautiful things. So thank you for spreading your story, your positive message, and for being vulnerable. We are just so grateful.
you're welcome. And I would just encourage anybody that is struggling to really start to look into uh, kind of what you're lacking, and instead of focusing on that, if you can take that energy where you're focusing on what you're lacking and start really putting that towards gratitude and having a daily gratitude practice, things will start to change really quick. So,
Oh,
and they
that's
did for me. So
Oh, I love that. What good wisdom. So thank you so much. I'm gonna pull you off to the side. I'm just gonna wrap up the show real quick.
awesome.
You guys, if you are able to chat, listen, give a Scott a good thank you in the comment section. We are so grateful for him and his story. I know I've got to go back through and listen and take some of these notes on all of the good stuff that he said that we can do to help. And I think just like that he said, person first, get to know somebody first. And I think that's a great theme throughout grief. I think people see people grieving and they want to know the full story and they want the most vulnerable parts of their life to be exposed to this kind of random stranger, and it's like that the griever doesn't want that. And I think that's just such a good lesson through and through on making sure that we aren't being inappropriately curious. So, Scott, thank you. I will see you guys next week, and thank you again so much for being here. Bye, everyone.